You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christi Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we are talking about parenting. We're beginning our series. We have a series of 3 that we just came out of on spiritual growth, interviewing Pastor Scott Sauls and Pastor Max Lucado. And now we're entering into the parenting phase of this little series that we're doing. Today we're talking about what our kids need from us. And we're going to hear 2 incredible interviews after this episode. One from David Thomas on Emotionally Strong Boys. And then we're going to also hear from Helen Smallbone, who has 7 children. I don't even know how many grandchildren. I can't even remember, 14 or something like. I mean, she's done this successfully. She's on the other side of all of this thing we call parenting, and we get to enter into her world to understand what it is that she did as a mom of 7 when they were living in poverty. She's the mom of Rebecca St. James, the brothers Joel and Luke Smallbone for King and Country. And I mean, it's just an incredible interview. So we got some really exciting episodes coming up here in the next couple weeks on parenting. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what we're learning as it relates to what our kids need. And, you know, it's fascinating because I love studying the research. I love looking at data. I love seeing what kids need from that perspective. And then also, too, scripturally, what does the Bible say about what kids need? Seeing how Jesus interacted with kids, but then also experientially playing that out as I watch my own children and seeing what they need, what they desire, what they long for from us as parents. And so I hope you guys resonate with this episode, because I think I just think there's this sense, this universal longing for connection and being known.
Yeah, but I also think as parents, there's this innate fear and maybe this just overarching worry that I'm not giving my kids what they need. And what do they need from me? Because as a mom, I mean, I feel like that pressure is endless, where it's just like, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right things? Am I too much? Am I not meeting them where they need to be? And so we like barrage ourselves with these doubts of, what do they need? Maybe they need more. And I think the anxiety that causes and the fear that causes is just as detrimental. And so, as we've talked about so many times, I don't think parenting is rocket science, but it is brain surgery. It is wiring of a small brain, and yet it is something we're fully equipped for. Like, God gave us these children to raise, and we have everything that we need to do that job well. He's entrusted them to us, which means he trusts us with them. Even that alone, I think, should cause us to just pause and like take a deep breath of, he trusts me with these children. He entrusted me, which means he trusts me. So therefore, like, how do I do it? How do I do it well? But also recognizing that we're coming in with everything we have. It's not like, you know, you may even see the title of this episode and be like, oh, okay, like, what do I need to like add in my arsenal of things that I need to give to my kids? And I think it's less of that. I think it's actually the opposite. I think it's, what do I need to take away that I've been trying to do that's adding so much extra pressure, fear, stress, worry? And what are the core things that they truly need that will not only bring them fulfillment and joy, and I think usher them into the fullness of the person that God wants them to be, but also that will bring me fulfillment and joy in this role of parenting.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something that you said where you mentioned, you know, how we talk about this, that parenting isn't rocket science, it's just brain surgery. And, you know, that really came out of the book that we wrote called Safe House, How Emotional Safety is the Key to Raising Kids Who Live, Love, and Lead Well. We'll put that in the show notes. We'll put that in the links in YouTube as well. And if you're listening on podcasts and you're a YouTuber, jump on YouTube and you can now watch on YouTube as well. The thing about this for me is, what that means is, as a parent, our interaction, our face-to-face eye contact, when we look our kids in the eye, our ability to be able to enter into their world wires their brain for relationships from the very moment that they're born. There is a neurobiological connection. Their neurons are wiring together. Neurons that fire together, wire together, is what Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about. And so there's mirror neurons, and our kids are mirroring the neurons, our facial expressions. So in other words, like when a child wrecks their bike and you go running down like, oh my gosh, the world's coming to an end. Are you okay? Are you okay? And that's the constant. Kids become wired. They mirror the neuron of the parent. And so what's happening is a child comes to overreact and get, anxious as well in moments like that versus learning how to be calm and presence in those types of situations. And honestly, I'm speaking with you, not at you, because that's my tendency. But it's important that we understand that, because when you wire a child's brain for relationships, they become wired for relationships. When you wire a child's brain for screens, they become wired for screens. And the reason I say that is because we are living in a screen obsessed world. We are just bombarded by screens, and the tendency is to use them in every area of life. And what we're trying to do is trying to say, we have to put a role of life into place, not just for us as adults, but for our kids, where we are wiring for experience, where we're wiring for relationship, we're wiring for connection with the outside world. Being able to get outside, and if you're an adult and you work on a computer all day, getting outside and just walking in your bare feet and grounding yourself in the yard or in the grass somewhere, like what it does physiologically, what it does biologically, what it does neurobiologically is fascinating. And we in the Western world have just gotten to a point where so I'm going off on a rabbit trail a little bit, but coming back to that, we get to have the privilege of helping wire our kids' brains for relationship by how we interact with them. And so today what we're going to talk about is what our kids need from us in that regard, because I'm just seeing more and more what they desire, what they need, what they want the most is simply our presence. And I know that sounds maybe too subjective, but we're going to objectify presence as much as we can today.
Yeah, I think it's hard when you use non-specific terms to define when you're trying to really nail something that's specific. And I think like when we set goals, when we have ideas for what we want in the future, that's one of the things that trips us up the most, is not using specific terms for the experience that we want. So with our children, we want to be present. So what does that really mean? So like if you drill down one layer, what are the feelings that you want them to experience and you to experience when you are present? Because like you can be present in body. And I think we all know this, like in marriage and friendship with our kids, you can have a person's physical presence with you, and yet they're not with you, right? Like there's not this, they're here in the moment fully with me. There's distraction. It's maybe picking up their phone, or you can just tell their mind and their heart is elsewhere. And that's something that is practiced. And I think it's really difficult in our current season of life where it's normal to be addicted to a screen. Like we've normalized that lifestyle and that behavior. Like
we've become desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. We don't even realize how much it is distracting us from what is present. And so one thing like we do is to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I think to even understand what it means to be present, because we throw out that term, right? What does that actually mean? Like to be present with my kids. To be in the moment means that you are fully aware of your physical body and the physical sensations that are going around right now in this moment. Because it's so easy to even be in a conversation and your mind is going through like how you're going to respond or what you have to do later or, your rebuttal. That's not present. Whereas presence is, so 5 would mean, well, you can walk them through that.
Yeah, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Senses exercise, which by the way, we're working on Kids EQ Academy right now. If you want to check that out, it is coming in next few months. We're pretty excited about it. Our hope is to get it out in January of 23. And Kids EQ Academy, basically emotional intelligence, biblical truth combined together in a curriculum for your kids. We're working on that right now. You can go to mykidseq.com, sign up for that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise is where you center, you get grounded in the moment, and you're paying attention to your senses. So you're looking at 5 things that you see around you. And in the middle of that, you're taking deep breaths in the moment. Like you're just, and by the way, this is a great exercise to do is your kids are saying, Dad, will you play dollhouse with me? Will you play Polly Pockets with me? Will you, play Legos with me or trains with me or whatever it is that your kids want to do with you? And you have not fully deprogrammed from the workday. You got
That's
emails
good.
coming in, texts coming in, and you just need to recenter to get into that mode to be truly present. It's just taking deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth, and just looking at 5 things that you see, 4 things that you hear, 4 things that you can touch, 4 things you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. I lost my senses there for a second. And just do that. Just center yourself. Do it slow. Do it slow. Take deep breaths in between each one. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. And just center in and just get into that moment in that exercise. And it really does center you.
Yeah, it brings you back to what is present in the moment. Other ones can be like just grounding your feet into the floor, feeling the sensations of where your feet are. What are they touching right now in the floor? And then also like, what is your body being supported by? Are you standing? Are you standing on the ground? Are you sitting in a chair? Breathe and just notice what is supporting your physical body. And those are the things that can bring us back into the present moment. But I really don't believe we can. That's turning on this prefrontal cortex. It's turning on the parts of the brain that allow us to be calm and to connect and to really be present in connection with people.
Yeah. And by the way, one of the other reasons this is so important is for us as adults. And I'm going to preface this for those of you who are new listening to the podcast, you're new listening to the Famous at Home podcast. One of the biggest things that we talk about is that parenting is the wrong term. We do not like the word parenting. Why? Because all of parenting research, you can sum it up into one primary conclusion, and that's that our kids become who we are. We write about this in the Famous at Home book. We'll link that there in the show notes today. If you haven't gotten the Famous at Home book, we'd highly encourage you to do that. The whole idea is that our kids become who we are. And I can cite all kinds of data and research that shows this, that we need to focus on our inner world, because as I said earlier, I gave the bike example, right? Like that is a trickle down effect by how we mirror neurons, right? Like our kids don't do as we say, they do as we do. That's just the reality of it. And so you think about all the distractions, and that's one of the reasons we're starting right now. You talk about practically, how do we show up and be present for our kids? What they need from us is our presence. But as Christi said earlier, it's not just our physical presence, it's our emotional, our presence, our spiritual, emotional, all of that.
It's like our whole being
our
present with them.
Our being is there, and they know we're there.
Yeah.
I mean, our 2-year-old already is, telling us to put our phones down if we're like texting or doing something in his presence.
Mom,
he's going, put the phone down.
Mom.
They feel it, they experience it. By the way, there is this is total side note, but I think it's worth mentioning. There is a research study. It's called continuous partial attention. We're paying continuous partial attention. I like to call it secondhand screen time. So in other words, like secondhand smoke has cancerous effects on other people around you when you're inhaling their smoke. The same thing is true for kids. Like there is actual data and evidence that shows that a child's pleasure system in the brain is inhibited when a parent is on the screen and the child is going, Mommy, look at me, Daddy, look at me, Mommy, look at me, and we're not paying attention. It's continuous partial attention. So we're paying partial attention continuously rather than full attention continuously, and it influences the pleasure system of a child's brain. And so we want to, the more you can compartmentalize that. And this is why this is so important. So I just want to say one other thing, because you think about how if you walk in any type of faith whatsoever and you try to meditate, you try to pray, you try to get still, you're going to have flying monkeys all over your brain trying to distract you from truly being present in the moment in your relationship with God. Like Richard Foster actually says this in one of his books, that basically the biggest problem with society is that we can't sit in a room alone by ourselves and with nothing else. And one of the ways that he talks about getting undistracted, which I think is a really cool one. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, you can do stuff like that to get grounded in a moment. One of the other ways that he describes of getting truly present in a moment, and you could do this before you spend time with your kids, but it's just a practice that he has done. And I think I'm saying this only because I don't do this, at least I haven't yet, but I love the idea. But I think it's finding individual ways that we can become present. For me, as you hear me say, like walking outside, I leave my phone inside, I go outside my bare feet, I walk around the grass, and I just walk around and pray and just get centered into what's going on around me outside. That's one way I do it. He talks about reading poetry, that poetry has these words, these double meanings that require you to focus in on them to understand what's going on in the moment. And that they really, so learning to read poetry is a way to get focused in the moment. Whatever it is, what I'm saying is we have to be present, and we have to be paying attention to our inner world, because what our kids need from us is our becoming. They don't need our parenting as much as they need our becoming. They need us to become healthy adults.
And I'm listening to this, and I know this is what we want to talk about, because this is it's true and it's real, but I know there's also a shame part that's coming up in a lot of us. That's like, I've totally screwed this up. Like, I've so messed up my kids. I'm on my phone. I'm on my computer. Like, that's my work. I know that I'm anxious. I know that I'm distracted. I know my phone is the first thing I wake up and grab, and I'm on it as I don't know. I guess it is somewhat, it's an addiction for sure.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Just to get rid of the shame.
Well, and that's what I want to do, is like drop the shame, because I want to just speak to that directly, to call that out and say, I think every single one of us will feel that twinge. And what if we see this as conviction and not shame, and just the Lord calling us up higher? Like, that's okay. Like, you can get better. And now you know the direction that I'm wanting you to move, and to call down this spirit of shame as if, we're never going to get this right and we've screwed up our kids.
Yeah. I love what Dr. Kurt Thompson says. He says there's only one way to never screw up your kids. And if you want to learn that one way to never screw up your kids, just stay tuned. I'll tell you at the end of the episode, so that way you listen to the entire episode for that. No, I'm just kidding.
He pauses though. He gives this long pause of like, there's only one way to not screw up your kids.
Yeah. So if you're paying attention to this, there's only one way to not screw up your kids. Don't have them. That's the only way.
But true.
We are fallen creatures living in a fallen world.
Yeah.
And I believe that the best thing we can do is create these buffers where we are creating an environment and an atmosphere, which is what we're all about at Famous at Home, where we are creating an atmosphere that builds resilience. That's really what it all is. It's putting building blocks into your home that builds resilience, so that all of us who live in a broken world, interact with a broken world, interact with broken humans within the household, come to a place of just going, yeah, these pillars of safety are what build resilience over time. And because I don't believe that kids are, so you often hear, well, kids are resilient, kids are resilient, kids are resilient. If kids are so resilient, why are we all now going through therapy because of our inner child wounds, right? Like, as adults, like it's all about like how we're getting healthy. And this, like,
kids are adaptive.
Kids are
have
adaptive.
learned to adapt.
And I believe that as kids adapt, what ends up happening is the kids who come out really, really good are kids who had resilient buffers built into their home, into their atmosphere, into their village, if you will, that helped them be resilient in the midst of brokenness. So
how do we do that? How do we help our kids build in these resilient buffers?
Good question.
Great question.
So one of the things that we do, so let me just talk a little bit about the number one issue at the core of all of this, and we can get in, there's a number of episodes that we've done on this before on cultivating a growth environment in your home, cultivating an emotional growth environment, cultivating a spiritual growth environment. We can go back and revisit some of those conversations as well, especially for those who are new listening to the podcast. Again, I wrote a book back in 2015 called Safe House, How Emotional Safety is the Key to Raising Kids Who Live, Love, and Lead Well. Talk about emotional safety. I just genuinely believe that at the end of the day, that environment of emotional safety, where a child has the ability to feel a wide range of emotions without being shamed in them, and where a parent enters into their inner world to navigate them, is absolutely critical. Now, with feelings, there's two routes that we go. We either deny, suppress, or repress them, and pretend that well, we shouldn't even look at feelings because feelings are, they're going to control our bodies. They're going to, we don't want feelings. Yes, that's true. And in our children's book, What Am I Feeling? We talk about a feeling is just a feeling. It's not in charge of you. But the only way to take charge of a feeling is to identify it and know what the heck it is. Because if you don't identify it and you just suppress it, repress it, or deny it, it will catch up to you in your body, because your body stores these things. They store these unresolved feelings that you have and emotions over time if you're not processing them. So the ability, the other end that we go is we allow our feelings to control us, and we allow our feelings to dictate what we believe about the world around us, and we just behave in that regard. The reality is there's a middle ground where we name our feelings, we identify what they are, and we see what messages that we can learn from them. And that's what Kids EQ Academy is all about. It's what we're working on, is helping kids identify, what is my feeling telling me? What's it telling me about the world around me? What's it telling me about the people I'm interacting with? What's it telling me about the boundaries I need to be setting in my life, right? And so for all of us to be able to navigate feelings in such a way, this is what the whole idea of setting a house of emotional safety is all about. And one of the things that I describe in the book is to lead in grace and follow in truth. So as John Townsend says, truth without grace will always be received as condemnation. And I think so often what we do is we see our children's overwhelmed emotions, we see their anger, we see their frustration, we see whatever it is that they're coming at us at, and we take offense to it, because it's like, I don't want my kids to be angry, I don't want them to be fearful. We either try to fix it, we see it as disobedience, we confuse it as disobedience, we confuse it as disrespect of authority, and what we end up doing then is we come down hard on our kids, and we lead in truth, and we try to fix it. And rather than just entering into their world, leading in grace, to understand it, to understand where's the feeling actually coming from. That's one of the biggest important things that we can do. Most important things that we can do with our kids is lead in grace and find out where that emotion is coming from. Where's that feeling coming from, before we make a judgment call about why that our child is feeling the way that they are. Because if you try to lecture them in that moment, their limbic system is overwhelmed. They're not going to listen. You can't lecture. You can't try to fix it, because they're not listening. They're not hearing you. And so, I mean, one of the ways that we do this, and one of the best ways when a child's limbic system is overwhelmed, is just to simply hold them in that moment. And I know it goes against everything that you probably learned about being a parent. It goes against, because, you got to make sure they follow the rules. You got to make sure. But if their limbic system is overwhelmed, listen, I'm telling you, it ain't going to work anyway. Right? All you're doing is you're increasing the battle, and because your limbic system is now going off, and when you got two limbic systems going off, it's just not creating anything well. And so your ability to be able to enter into your child's world and help them calm their overwhelmed brain in the moment, that's what emotional safety is all about. And I believe that is the single greatest buffer for building resilience in kids when they're emotionally overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I think I just want to translate this into like adult terms. I mean, imagine you're coming in, you just had a horrible, blow up with a friend, a business meeting, you've heard horrible news. You are overwhelmed emotionally. You come in the door. Like, what type of person do you want your spouse to lead with? Do you want them to lead with, well, I told you that was going to happen and you shouldn't have done this, and blah, 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 blah. Or do you want just them to like hold you and hug you? Like, in our overwhelm, we want comfort. And then we want someone to help like wisely guide us through what the next steps are. But we need to be comforted. Imagine what a child in a small body needs. Your
comment there makes me think of what Bob Goff posted one time. He pretty much summed up all of Safe House into one Instagram post. And it said this, it said, be the adult your kids needed.
That you
needed. Be the adult you needed when you were a child. Yeah. And I'm just like, be the adult you needed when you were a child. What did you need? And for some of us, that means we have to reconnect with our inner child, because we don't even know what our inner child needs anymore, because of false self and imposter syndrome and things like that. And that's a whole other conversation we can get into.
And I honestly think that is another topic we should talk about sometime on another podcast, is like, we throw that term around, inner child. If you're new to that world and that word is super strange to you, it can be confusing to understand, but we talk about it even in terms of marriage. Like, there is a young child part of us and many of them that are still with us but that we've dismissed, we've left, we've neglected, we've rejected, because there came a rupture, some sort of trauma that enters where we're like, you can't handle this. So we basically leave them there back in the past. And part of the work of healing is going back and reclaiming that child, telling that child what it needed to know at that time, what it needed in the moment when something happened. I mean, basically a trauma is something that happens to us outside of our control or agency. And so that happens a lot in childhood. And to all the parents, we have to recognize that's going to happen to our children. Like trauma, it doesn't have to look like the big, what we call capital T traumas that are the big things we would typically think of. The lowercase t traumas are just as impactful. And they may look as...
Especially when they happen over time, when they're consistently happening.
Yes. But even those small ones, I mean, I was processing with my counselor, literally back when I was 2, when I was 8, when I was 10, like incidents that I remember where it was trauma. I mean, one of them was it was acting. I was in a play and I totally blanked. Like I went blank on the stage, and I have carried the trauma of that memory, that embarrassment, that shame, that fear of being up there all alone, everyone looking at you and you have nothing. Like the fear of that has then carried with me into adulthood. So not that consciously, but that little girl inside who's still stuck back there on that stage all alone is saying every time we get asked to speak, it could happen again. Don't do it. Don't do it. And I bulldoze her, right? And I force her to get up on the stage and I do it anyway. But you can see then what a battle would go on inside of me and why I feel so anxious going up there. Once I'm done, it was so great. I love it. But the battle to get up there is because I'm bulldozing this sweet little girl who's still 8 years old. And I have to go back and tell her that she's safe and the adult me has got this. But those are the instances, an example of what can happen, small things in our childhoods, our children's childhoods, and they will happen. Like, that's not to scare all of us to death. It's just, it's life.
Yeah, and it's coaching and it's learning how to navigate it.
And we can sit with them in that and we can repair a lot of that work even now.
And one of the things I love about it is, because I think this is an opportunity. This is like one of those things that we celebrate because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is a way to celebrate this brokenness so that we can learn from it and grow from it, right? It's like, in order for seeds to give birth, first they must die. There's things that must die within us in order to grow and in order to have birth and in order to give life. And when you're walking alongside your children in such a way that they get the privilege of having an adult who loves them and is championing them, walk along their brokenness and their suffering, rejoice in suffering, says the Bible, right? And I think, from that standpoint.
And sees their parents doing the same work.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're modeling for them. You're not stuck there no matter what happens.
And I think that's why Jesus says, unless you become like a little child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And I think there's this sense of this inner child where we, one of the practical ways I do this is I wear my hat backwards a few times a week just to remind myself of my inner child, so that I can, because I find that I enter into my kid's world more when I'm entering in as a child than as when I'm entering into an adult with responsibilities. It's the adult with responsibilities that doesn't know how to enter into the child world and enter into your kid's world and give them what they need.
And if we don't know how to shift out of that version of us, because that's for sure, that's a real version of us that we do need to play in order to survive as adults in life. But if we don't know how to revert out of back and enter into our inner child, we won't be on the floor playing with our kids. We won't be able to even connect with them. And even to connect in friendship and in fun and in laughter and as spouses, like we need to connect inner child to inner child.
One of the other ways that I think it's important to talk about getting to building the resilience factor in your home and for your kids and giving your kids what they need is we opened up with this a little bit, and I want to come back to it, is screen time, because we've got to set limits on screen time. I know we say this, and now the phones
everyone's
are
like eye roll. I know.
We know this, we got this going on, but let me just give some practicals here and just show you some ways that it's influencing our lives. One of the things that I've noticed is we give our kids 45 minutes on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. They get 45 minutes One of the things that we've used this as a tool for, so our son has a Nintendo Switch. Our kids have a Nintendo Switch. They play Mario Kart, Mario Party, things like that. And they have 45 minutes on the weekends that they get this Nintendo Switch and can play. Our daughter usually isn't as much into the Switch as our son, which makes a lot of sense based on research in the brain and boys and girls. But what we've noticed is that whenever we get lackadaisical with that, he goes over 45 minutes, maybe it's the summertime, so we add another extra day of 45 minutes.
It's like a Thursday. Mom,
can I have 45 minutes? And we're like, sure, let's relax the rules a little bit. What we've noticed, two things we've noticed. Number one, and I remember even noticing this back when he was going to public school and he'd come home from school and he'd watch TV after school, versus when he'd come home from school and we said, nope, no more TV after school. He is a completely different kid whenever he is not using screens versus when he is. In other words, he's present. He's not present when he's been using screens more than he should be. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something we have to pay attention to. A lot of times the disconnect between us and our kids is because our brains have become wired for screens, not for relationships. So we're not getting a back and forth. Hey, how was your day, bud? Fine. Good. Yeah. Okay. Whereas when he's not using screens, it's going, how was your day, bud? Good, Dad. How was your day? Now the question's coming back. There's give and take. There's bounce back and forth. And we're beginning to see that. And I genuinely believe it isn't just of him aging. I think that's part of it. But I think the other factor is a screen factor that we've got to pay. There's a qualitative difference. And when you're not paying attention to the qualitative difference day to day, because it's so subtle and you just start using it and you start letting your kids use it. It's just it's these small little permissions here and there, just like the enemy did in the Garden of Eden. It's like these small, little, subtle yeses. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you wake up one day and you're like, what the heck just happened to my family? Where's my kid? Like, it's like, we've got to pay attention to those subtle yeses, those subtleties. And then the second thing, I'll say this is the second thing. So the first thing is I see a qualitative difference in how our kids show up when they're not using screens as much. Number two is, and this is the fun part about coaching our kids as it relates to screens, is that, and we've been able to point this out over time, the one thing that they're always asking for is, can we have our 45 minutes? Can we have screen time? And so for us to be able to coach and go, why is it that is the one thing you'd want? Why is it that's the one thing you're asking for? If we were to let you on screens all the time, you'd never be jumping on the trampoline. You'd never be outside playing soccer. You'd never be outside in a water hose and on the water slide. You'd never be outside playing laser tag. Yeah, there's all of these things. It's like, oh, you're right, Dad. Yeah, I see that. Like, it's a way to coach our kids. And so often when we're busy, when we're not present, it's influencing how present we are, because we become complacent. We become I don't even know that complacent. It's permissive parenting. We're just permissive. We're just like, yeah, sure.
Well,
because we're busy and because we've got stuff going on in our world that we're just like, yeah, go for it. It doesn't matter.
It feels easier in the moment. I mean, hands down. I think we can all agree to that. But I think we started to see the fighting, the sibling rivalry was increasing. And so we sat the kids down and we're like, what has happened? Like, you guys used to truly play together pretty well. Like, what is going on? And our daughter wells up with tears and she says, Mom, I think it's when we started doing our 45 minutes more, which was during the summer. And I was like, that's really interesting. And she's like, I think we need to go back to when it was just on the weekend. I was like, okay, well, that was, I mean, and not like this is always this way, but it was easy in that moment because I was like, okay, well, let's try it. Let's try it like a test. And so she's like, we're not going to do screens at all this week. Okay, deal. And she's like, but, you ready for this? But, Mom, that means you can't do Instagram either.
I love it.
And I was like,
her so much.
Oh, yes. Well,
Daddy agrees.
Okay. I mean, they said the same for you, Buckaroo, by the way.
Instagram's easy for me.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't get on it anyway.
ESPN,
I have to force myself to get on it.
And it doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter what it is. Right. But we were like, okay, but talk about a gut check where you're like, I'm asking my kids to do something I'm not willing to do. And then she comes down, and I did pretty good the first 2 days. I'll be totally honest. Day 3, I am sitting on the couch. I like rote memory. Just, touch the button, pull up Instagram. I'm scrolling. She walks behind me. Mom, is that Instagram? I was like, I felt like the child where I was like caught, like,
Did you hear what you said though? Rote memory.
It was. Oh, it's totally rote memory. I mean, it's like, we've talked about
your
that
brain
on here.
becomes wired for screens.
Yes.
That's the reality. That's what I'm talking about. It becomes wired for relationships or it becomes wired for screens. Our son's saying, how's your day? It was good, Dad. How was yours? Or it's, how's your day? It was fine.
Well, because
and it's just, there's a difference.
Well, it's because the screen plays the role of an interaction. So they don't need to ask back, right? Whereas when they don't have that, they are looking for other inputs back. So they care to look into the life of another person. And another reason, mornings and screen time, that the earlier in the morning that you put, like if, it's the first thing you open, turn on, look at in a day, I guess the research has shown it's the waves, the brain waves, how we wake up matters. And if we miss those early morning waking brain patterns that happen naturally, if we get on a phone first thing, it literally wires the brain for that screen all day long. Whereas if we don't even, and I don't know, I saw people asking like, well, how long? Like, how long should I wait? But the longer you delay, the more creativity, yes,
calm, imagination,
that it sets you up for the day. So think about how powerful that is. I mean, that's just.
Well, one of the things that we talk about as it relates to distraction and not having distraction is if you set a rule of life, and we can talk about that sometime. I think it'd be good to do an episode on what rule of life looks like. But they're your daily liturgies. They're the liturgies throughout the day. You have a liturgy whether you realize it or not, and these are these repetitions that you're doing throughout your day. And when we interrupt our normal repetition, one of the ways to do this is because it is such a physiological effect on your body for your own presence. Your own presence in the moment is an hour a day, an hour in the morning, first thing when you wake up, and an hour at night before you go to bed. Just cut screens out completely, and just get them out. Just shut them off, turn them off, get them away from. Don't sleep with it next to your bed. Don't have it near you. For the first hour and the last hour. That's one rule that you can follow in your life that will help you in that process.
I don't love the word rules. We go back and forth on this, but you see why it's important. Because on day 3, you're still on Instagram.
But a rule of life or a liturgy, it goes back to that lattice, right? It goes back to that vine. It's a picture
grow.
of a vine. It's how you grow. Yeah. And I mean, we are created in God created laws. There are specific laws about sowing and reaping, and like you have to follow in order to thrive in your life. And if you don't follow those rules, you will not thrive. That's just the reality of it.
But I think,
and they influence presence.
And that's the incongruence that our children see, is when we require that of them, and yet we don't live by it ourselves. And I think that's the mirror in the face for all of us, and it comes back to exactly what we start. It's who we're becoming. It's not really our parenting. It's not even our direct relationship with our children, though that is important, obviously. It is who we are becoming, and are we consistently living out the things that we're asking our children to, and holding ourselves to the same standard, because essentially they will just repeat what they have seen.
And I want to just end with one last one. Yeah, you might have heard us say this before, but I think it's so foundational to who our kids become, creating that emotional safety in the home. That what it does is it gives you a practice. It gives you a way to practice presence with your kids. And so you can get our children's books. What am I feeling? What do I do with worry? What do I do with anger? All are out now. What am I feeling has a pull out feelings chart in the back, a poster that it's a perforated poster. You can hang it in your kid's bedroom. But one of the things that we encourage families to do is, rather than doing a high and low at the end of a day, do one positive emotion that your children had that day, one positive feeling, and then one negative or uncomfortable feeling that they had that day. I don't like to use the word negative a lot, just because I think that every feeling leads us to growth and intimacy in some way. It's just how we view it, even though it just feels uncomfortable. And so I would just really encourage you, instead of doing a high and a low, give your children a feelings chart, have them point and label and name a feeling that they felt that day. I was excited, content, happy, joyful over this particular situation. I felt brave. I felt safe. And then an uncomfortable one. I felt unsafe. I felt sad. I felt jealous. I felt embarrassed. I felt angry. I felt fear, scared, whatever they were feeling, and have them connect it to a situation. Because what it's doing is it's giving you the ability to enter into the hearts of your kids and see what's really going on in their inner world, instead of getting just fine and good and this, and it also, if you're doing it as a parent, it's helping you enter into your own inner world and see what's happening in your world, so that you can be more present with others, because now all of a sudden you're paying attention to what you're experiencing and feeling as well. And I just think there's such beauty in that process, because in a lot of ways you're also, if you're married and your spouse is sitting there as well, you're also getting insight into how your spouse is doing.
It's like two birds, one stone.
It's a really good exercise.
It really is.
Upcoming.
So in summary,
yeah,
presence. Really, what do our children need from us? They need our presence.
They need our presence.
They need us to become the greatest version of ourselves that we can be, because they will not
Focusing on your
outgrow
becoming.
Our
emotional maturity
while they're under our roof. They will not. And so basically it's raising our floor so that we raise their ceiling. Our ceiling so they raise their floor.
That's right. We talk about this in the Famous at Home book, by the way. If you guys want more detailed information on a lot of this stuff, we walk families through what we do to coach them to set values, set rhythms, be emotionally present in the house. Very practical, very, very practical. It's almost like a workbook. The Famous at Home book, we'll put it in the show notes. You can get that and start applying that as well. We'd love for you to be able to do that. So presence, emotional safety. Number 2, screens, paying attention to how you interact with your kids and how you're helping them navigate the screen. And then number 3, talking about emotions as well in the home, and making emotional vocabulary a norm in how you communicate with your family. So next couple weeks, I hope you enjoy this parenting series. This was number 1 of 3 coming up, focused on parenting in particular, or becoming. And so next week we have David Thomas, specifically talking about emotionally strong boys. The following week we have Helen Smallbone, and I hope you check those episodes out. We've done those interviews, and man, I just it's wild how you go back and you just take notes over and over again from what they talk about. They impacted
me personally, both of them, like profoundly. They're such pretty rich
pretty
content.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Until next week.
But I was going to say this. If you haven't looked us up on YouTube yet, go subscribe on YouTube. Take a look at the episodes. We're getting our setup even better and better and better each week. And so go check that out. And if you're on YouTube, say hi, put it in the comments. We love you guys. Until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home. We love you.